Hello everyone, my name is Mike Hanley. I'm the Chief Security Officer here at GitHub, and I'm excited to talk to you today about improving security vulnerability reporting. Now, let me just start with the obvious. Open source software powers the entire world around us and the ecosystems that we live in every single day. And because of that, the security of open source software and ecosystems are mission critical to the world around us. In order to achieve good outcomes in that mission, we really need to leverage the collective power of the open source community, of vulnerability reporters, of security researchers, of open source project maintainers, working together to make sure that vulnerability reports are really resolved as quickly and as completely as they possibly can be. And at GitHub, we believe that coding is social, but so is the security work that happens behind the scenes to protect those broader ecosystems. Now, we've taken the time to go back and actually look at hundreds of vulnerability reports that have cleared through our security lab and our research team and disclosed to open source projects every single year. And we've conducted a fair amount of research, also going out and actually just talking to maintainers about what's the experience of the vulnerability disclosure process from their perspective, and what do those interactions with vulnerability reporters actually look like, whether it's on GitHub or somewhere else. And through those conversations, that analysis, the data we've collected, we found really a lot of opportunities to improve the way that the security research community and who are reporting vulnerabilities to projects and also doing that original discovery work can work together with open source project maintainers to achieve that shared goal of getting to a good security fix. And in this talk, I'm going to take you through a couple of the tips there just to help assure that there's a positive experience on both ends of this conversation, and that we quickly address those security vulnerabilities when and as they are discovered. So let me just start with the first rule, and I think this is probably one of the most important ones, and that's just to establish the rules and norms of collaboration. And on the maintainer side, this is probably in the form of a security policy, and on the reporter side, this is probably in the form of a disclosure policy. So let's start with the first one. So security policy. If you're a maintainer, and regardless of how many available resources that you've got, you really want to make sure that you can clearly indicate to any potential reporter or contributor what and how you want to receive vulnerability reports. If you don't do this, the challenge for vulnerability reporters is that they have to do things like going and digging into Git commit history just to try to find an appropriate email contact to reach out to for a project. And in some cases, they may not even bother to take the time to do this because it's literally too much effort and it's an arduous process. And the negative outcomes that you can realize here is, of course, that this leads from everything from spamming the wrong point of contact to friction and getting passed around between people within the project to otherwise suboptimal public disclosures or things like a loss report. And of course, in the worst cases, this can actually result in basically dropping a 0-day vulnerability through a public issue or a public pull request. On GitHub as a platform, you've got the opportunity to actually go set a security policy for your project pretty easily and try to take as much of the ambiguity out of this process as you possibly can. This allows you to express your preference on where and how you want to receive security reports. And you'll find that most security or vulnerability reporters are all too happy and eager to take that direction on when, where, and how you want to receive those reports, because frankly, it makes their life easier and services that end goal of how do we get to a good fix. Now, if we look at this example with systemd, you'll note that there's a couple things that are really important and helpful here. First and foremost is expressing their desire for non-public disclosure, right? So coordinating this privately, and then indicating an email contact to use to contact those developers privately to work on it. So short and sweet, clear and to the point. Now, on the research side, for you vulnerability reporters, it's also equally clear, we think, to be clear about what your disclosure timeline and expectations are as well. And a smooth collaboration between yourself and the maintainers are going to begin with your rules of engagement and expectations. Now, if you define and publish your disclosure policy, just clearly state, again, how do you intend to interact with the maintainers, the resolution that you're seeking, your publication timeline on when you'd like to be able to disclose. Again, it doesn't need to be complicated. I think short and sweet, just in the example like we saw a minute ago, promotes clarity on that front. And you can see that in GitHub Security Lab's policy, which I'm showing you here, it's also pretty short. And frankly, you're welcome to copy it for your own disclosure process for your project as well. One thing that I want to highlight is you should try to be flexible and accommodate the reality that there's a variety of situations that you're going to encounter in open source. Be open about your needs, but also seek to try to understand the needs or the limitations or the challenges or the situations that the maintainer might find themselves in as well. And I think when you can take that empathetic approach of working together toward a common goal of getting to a fix, it's a little bit easier to find that shared ground to work on. And that's a good segue to the next point, which is, again, getting to that common goal of working on an effective report and a clear and durable fix as quickly as possible. Now, as the vulnerability reporter, be aware of a few things. One, maintainers are often working on their projects on personal time with no funding. Two, maintainers are receiving end of security vulnerabilities can be upset, stressed out, producing anxiety. They may have varying levels of experience working on security issues or with security researchers in the first place, so they may be sort of in unfamiliar territory. And also remember that maintainers probably are pausing a paying full-time job to jump on a critical vulnerability in their open source project to protect the people who are consuming and leveraging that as part of their other software. So as a reporter, I think just having a cognizance and appreciation and empathy for that situation and experience can go a really, really long way in terms of working effectively and collaborating on some of these issues. And a mindset that I would encourage you to take going into this is think of a vulnerability report as a contribution. Like in this capacity, you are acting as a contributor to a project. This is as important as the mindset that you would take to a feature or pull request or any other improvement to a project. And thinking about that as a contributor, and if you're a maintainer, thinking about vulnerability reporters as contributors can go a long way to helping set that relationship off on the right foot. What can vulnerability reporters do to make a good contribution, right? Like it's helpful to probably think through a certain set of things that make that better from the maintainer's perspective. And really it's all about having a very actionable report that's easy to verify, triage, and fix. I'm going to take you through a quick example to show you what that looks like. We're looking at a report from the GitHub Security Lab, and first and foremost, let's start with impact. Have the impact clear and upfront so that the maintainer knows what they're looking at and can start the process of assessing risk and prioritizing resolution. Here we see, we've got a pre-auth RCE bug. That's probably pretty serious. Being clear and upfront with that helps the maintainer bump that one to the top of the priority list in terms of working on. Second is having a POC or proof of concept. This is going to help the maintainer understand, how do I actually reproduce this bug? Like, what does this actually look like that I'm reading about in the report? That can be quite helpful if for no other reason than to just drive consensus on what is the impact, working together on that. Now, during this phase, the reporter and the maintainer are both going to discuss the impact. And both parties, again, just need to keep in mind that, if I think it's more important than you think it is, like just working on establishing that shared understanding of criticality, and again, using the POC and the impact statements can really help with that. Just remember, the reporter has no interest in publishing a fake bug, and the maintainer has no interest in leaving a critical bug unresolved. That can really help keep everybody working on moving in the same direction. Third, again, as a contributor, think about what can I offer that helps make this easier to resolve. And one of those things can be pointing out the specific incriminated code and providing a helpful suggestion on remediation. Now, it's important to remember that the maintainer is immersed in this code all the time and probably has a different or a differing perspective on how to best remediate it. But you should also consider that your contribution or suggestion here is valuable, even if they don't take it as written, because the vulnerability reporter, you in this situation, are going to have good knowledge of corner cases or remediation bypasses that may be unique to you as having a security research background and perspective from that particular role set. Fourth, again, going back and referencing the disclosure policy that you have, again, just to set clarity on the norms and expectations that you've got for the rest of the engagement. Five, I think proposing your help. So proposing to review the fix. So the third step, of course, is providing a suggestion for one, but independent of whether or not the maintainer takes that suggestion, in this phase, just offering to be helpful on it and helping to confirm that the fix is complete and ready to rock and roll can be a really helpful, again, contribution from your unique background as a security researcher. Last but not least, ask for a private patch environment. On GitHub, the maintainer can create that private GitHub security advisory, and they can invite the reporter to collaborate on that in private, so that when things are ready to disclose, the reporter will have reviewed and tested the patch and been able to confirm for the maintainer that everything is good to go. So those are some lessons on creating an effective report. Now, third big tip is really all around notification and downstream communication in a really effective and clear way. This tip's primarily for maintainers, but if you're on the vulnerability research side, I think it's important to understand this part of the process. And I said earlier that collaborative disclosure doesn't end with the report, and it actually doesn't end with pushing a patch either. It's really ending when you've got broad community-wide awareness and notification that the patch is available, it's critical, and what it's trying to actually address in the ecosystem. So notifying users of the vulnerability, giving them that path to upgrade to the patched version, giving them that clarity on what the underlying issue is and why it matters to them is really important. You cannot assume that the downstream consumers of your project are always just sort of blindly running the latest version of the product. Now, I'm going to show you the GitHub Security Advisory again here, because it's important to note that on GitHub, you can publish the security advisory that was private until this time. So GitHub is a CNA, meaning we're a CVE numbering authority. And the CVE allocation process for a security advisory is actually really straightforward, and it takes typically just a few days to go through it from start to finish. And when you publish the security advisory, your security advisory becomes available to the wider GitHub advisory ecosystem through the advisory database, as well as to the wider open source security software ecosystem through the CVE number. Now, don't forget, of course, to credit the vulnerability reporter for their contribution to your product, just like you would any other feature contributor who provided something to your project. Now, on Dependabot, if you're in a supported ecosystem, whether it's Go or NPM, your public security advisory will actually automatically trigger a series of Dependabot alerts. And the benefit of this, of course, is this does a lot of the legwork of notifying your project's downstream consumers about the exposure. And for projects that have enabled Dependabot security updates, Dependabot will actually also create the PR that will do the update for you. So you can just review the update, see what's getting patched. It makes it really easy for developers to adopt that latest and greatest and limit the long-term proliferation of the vulnerable versions of that code. So to just kind of bring things to a wrap up, really a couple, I think, important lessons learned. One, if you're a maintainer, just take the time necessary to create that security policy and just make known what's the easiest way to work with you, what your expectations are, etc. And also look at things like GitHub Security Advisories as a means to streamline that collaboration that you've got, that invitation to the vulnerability research community, and really as contributors to working together with you on this project. And don't shy away from the vulnerability reports, and just keep in mind that those are actually intended to protect and improve the security of your project and the consumers and customers of it who are working with you. Last but not least, just the notifications piece. Notifying everyone who's using the project and giving credit to the reporter are critical steps in closing that out. On the research side, similarly, being clear about your disclosure policy. Be clear, but also be flexible. And part of being flexible, again, really just means adopting a maintainer-first approach that's one of empathy, flexibility, being helpful, understanding that maintainers are probably doing this along with a lot of other jobs, and just staying focused on the goal, which is patching the vulnerability and working in collaboration with the maintainer to get to that outcome. Now, let me just look forward to what's next. Two things I want to touch on here. First off, I'd love to come back to you before next year and tell you disclosure doesn't end with the notification of the vulnerability in your project. Now it ends with preventing this bug from repeating itself ever in your code or in the code of other projects. And for that, the vulnerability reporter and the maintainer can collaborate on a code-QL query that detects that bug pattern. And these queries really act as a way of thinking about like a shared corpus of knowledge about all vulnerability patterns that we've cataloged as queries, and can help you automatically prevent them from ever repeating again in the future. Now, we provide CodeQL as GitHub as a free tool for open source, and we also open source all of our queries, so they're usable by everyone through GitHub code scanning. And we also provide CodeQL training from the security lab to help achieve this particular goal. Last point, really around private disclosure. We are working toward a paved path to support the coordinated private disclosure of a vulnerability report all the way through patch announcement for the open source community. We'll be working on this paved path, and we expect to deliver this in the next 12 months to give maintainers and researchers more options on how to receive and coordinate and partner together on resolving vulnerability reports through that private disclosure process directly on GitHub, the platform. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time. Appreciate you joining us today, and I want to wish you happy, safe, and secure coding out there. Thanks, everyone.